And welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be here today. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm an instructor for the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program, and it has been my honor and privilege to work with experts in the subjects we cover in the UCLA program to help you really be innovative and at the top in terms of understanding the challenges and the issues that your students and parents face. And today I'm so glad to be able to talk about sports and athletics and how that impacts our students. And I have a longtime friend and expert, Kim from McMillan and Company, McMillan Education. What's the title for
It's
your?
McMillan Education. Yep,
Okay.
I'm chair of innovation, athletic recruiting, college placement, all of that.
So we'll let you tell us more about that and what that looks like. So Kim, thank you for joining me today and talking about athletes and sports and what that looks like for students and parents. So tell us a little bit about your background and how this became your area of knowledge and expertise.
Right. So I was a two-sport athlete at a Division I university and had a great experience, but it was an intensive experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. Had some great successes there, both team success and personal success. Went on to coach a couple of sports, both at the collegiate level, Division I, but also at the World Cup level. I've coached an international team at the World Cup. I've coached Scotland's national lacrosse team, but I
Wow.
also continued on. I played U.S. squad in three different sports, including field hockey and lacrosse, which were my sports at the University of Maryland, and just continued to stay in the world of athletics. I stepped away from coaching Division I sports to work at a boarding school, an independent school, and really learned and loved that kind of culture. So I have a background in collegiate sports, independent schools, and from there, really just kind of knowing what the landscape is, going through the athletic processes with those kinds of students and student athletes. And I've coached anywhere from middle schoolers to Special Olympians to World Cup athletes. My background is, I'm an undergraduate in journalism, graduate in education, and I got my doctorate in student well-being through participation in athletics and extracurriculars. So, I love kids. I love this whole process, but it's a really challenging process. And being a college planner allows me to have great relationships with students. And the student athlete part is just a level of vulnerability that needs intense guidance for these student athletes and their parents.
And I love that you point that out is that vulnerability because sometimes I think we forget that one with teenagers, but especially with athletes.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the misconceptions as you work with these families and students? What are some of the misconceptions that they have that you find that you need to help them understand the reality versus the myth or the rumor? What are some of those things
Right.
you run into?
Yeah, a lot of it is just level of commitment, right? Even 10 years ago, the level of commitment has changed significantly in all divisions. Division I, it's not a joke that it's a full-time job, and that is in every Division I institution. A mid-major still has the student athletes have the same commitment academically and athletically. So, for example, in season or out of season, they could be in the weight room at 6:30 in the morning. Then they'll have breakfast and then they'll go to classes. They might have an individual training session or a film session and then practice and then possibly study hall. And then they might have dinner in there somewhere. And that cycle continues, right? And, often I'll hear a family say, well, we'll just do a mid-major or we'll do an Ivy League. And well, the Ivy League commitment is exactly the same. The only distinction is the Ivy League reduces their league schedule. So Ivy League student athletes tend to play fewer games, not many fewer, but their commitment is still the same. Like many sports, if they are in the Ivy League and they win the Ivy League, they go to the NCAA tournament. So their season gets extended. And so those are the differences. The other thing is, well, I will just play Division 3. Division 3 commitment is very different, but you also have a different quality of life. Division 1 and 2 are highly competitive, scholarship related. Um, it's a full-time job, and you are expected to balance your academics. In Division 3, it's a different collegiate experience, but it is as intensive. I've had Division 1 athletes go Division 3 so they could study abroad, do some of the
Mhm.
research experiences, and full knowing that it only takes one misfortune to end your athletic career. And so that student-centered approach that Best Fit has got to reign through, because even your first day of training, you could be hit in the head and your concussion could end your career. So there is that, and all the other factors that student athletes cannot account for. We just have to think about those in our planning. But those are the misconceptions. The testing part of it is still a misconception,
Mhm.
because as you and I know, even in the last couple of weeks, we're in March now. The creep is back in. Who will require testing? Who will not? What value is it for student athletes? We still recommend student athletes do test just in case it's required
Mhm.
eventually. But also the fine line that we're seeing in admission is that you may not submit tests for application, but if you're accepted and you accept to attend, they will often want test scores for placement. And that's reflective of the COVID, that period of time. So all these things are just families not knowing what they don't know, and that's our job to let them know that there are so many things you don't know, and it's our job to guide you.
Mhm. So should the primary focus of a family or parent as they're working, as they're focusing on the sport for their child be, okay, this is going to help my child to get a scholarship to pay for college?
No, that's a parallel path when you're kind of, it's a tricky question, but it's a parallel path, right? You have the college planning path, you have the athletic recruiting path, and even though there are, 3% of the elite student athletes that go and play whatever division you want to designate it, the fact of the matter is there are fewer scholarships, because if a team has a roster of 18 and the NCAA says to Division 1 or 2 um, university, these are the scholarships you were allotted. Not every single student athlete gets a full ride. In fact, most of them do not. So the scholarship piece is less about that. It's less about that. This is a supply and demand to the coaches. The supply and demand hasn't changed. The only exception is the demand from the coaches it's changed because we have transfers now. And
Mhm.
even if we're not talking about the COVID transfer, because that cycle is finishing up now, students are free to transfer. So if I'm a coach and I'm recruiting, my first recruiting is going to be from the transfer portal, because I now get on demand an experienced student athlete who has been through the rigors of training, has been through the rigors of practice, has been through the rigor of traveling. They are now college ready to help a team. Whereas a freshman is not even close. They're probably not ready for the strength and conditioning as much as they think they are. They may not be ready for that schedule because there's a little more latitude academically in the schedule, but that's usually filled in Division 1 and 2 by athletics. In Division 3, like I said, it's a more holistic approach there. So that's that balance that we're really considering.
Yeah, and that's very much the case is adding in the sport doesn't make it easier. It just adds another layer of complexity to their whole
Right.
consideration and their
Yeah,
process.
and it's not dissimilar from an elite cellist or an elite dancer or even an elite artist. It is not dissimilar, with maybe, you know, more running involved perhaps, and weight training, maybe.
Yeah, early mornings in the gym, right?
Exactly.
So should students specialize in a sport or is it, you mentioned you were a two-sport athlete. Is that still
Yep.
common or, because oftentimes you
Yeah.
find students who's like they've been doing lacrosse or soccer since they were
Right.
5 and that's their only sport. So what
Right.
What's the recommendation for that?
So I'm also an elite strength and conditioning coach. I have a CSCS, so I'm certified to train elite teams, professional teams at strength and conditioning. And I'm also aligned with the Academy of Pediatrics, et cetera. So when you're looking at the data suggests that the specialization could be more harmful than helpful, but you really got to put everything in context. What does the specialization mean? For me, in the holistic sense, student athletes should physically be training in multi-planes, multi-fashions, multi-directions, all of that. And some sports are very centric in perhaps forward motion, et cetera. But cross training, in my experience, allows the student athlete to have different coaches, different venues, different social experiences, and different levels of success and failure. Student athletes fail every single day in training. If they're not learning from them, then they're not progressing. If you can build that context in around in different venues and different sports, you have a more well-rounded student athlete. It's kind of the argument between liberal arts education and going directly into something, whether you like it or not. The more informed you are, or the more tools you have, in the end, you'll be more polished or have the ability to handle those things that you don't know are coming your way, right? So the goal of training is to control everything you can so that you're better able to handle those things you have no idea that are coming your way. So the specialization, if you're an archer, if you're something in a really refined um, area, that can work. But even the studies of the 10,000 rules, you look at all the studies and that proves to be not factual.
So the studies of the 10,000, explain that a little bit more in detail.
So, if you have a level of competency beyond 10,000, whatever, I can't remember there, whether it's 10,000, 50,000, et cetera, then you will absolutely be successful. But everything is in context, and the experiments that are done are within context. The fact of the matter is, we're dealing with human beings, and we're dealing not with young adults yet, we're dealing with adolescents. And
Mhm.
then as they emerge into young adulthood, which generally is going into college, there is a shift and change. So with college planning, athletic recruiting, we have to remember that they are adolescents, and the chirping that happens in the locker room, on the bus, and social media, and what I call the kind of the family cocktail circuit,
Mhm.
the cocktail party circuit. There's truth to all of it, and there's untruths to all of it. So every single student athlete journey is very different. I could have twins, and I've had twins, and their journeys have been very different for a number of reasons, particularly because they are individual.
Mhm. Yeah. I've heard you talk about the broken leg rule before, and you
Mm.
mentioned, you can go and end up with a concussion at, or any other kind of injury at any time. So how does that factor into your choices when you're looking at college and playing a sport in college?
Right. So, the question is, could you see yourself thrive here? Right. And that means the landing of the university. It used to be, can you see yourself here? And I'd like to change that because we look at all the glitz and glamour of all the colleges. I mean, they're built out like country clubs now.
Mhm.
And anybody could see themselves driving a Ferrari or driving a Lamborghini, but it doesn't mean you can thrive in that. Like if you I say if you can drive a Lamborghini, that's fine, but you can't punch it to 200 miles an hour. So you're not going to thrive in that car. However, it is that landing spot, and that broken leg test really is an every hour, every day possibility for anyone. So I'll give you an actual example. I had a student athlete committed as a soccer player to a NESCAC, high level NESCAC, and just did everything right academically, was on the mark. We had the athletic recruiting path, but we also had that college planning path. He was a very good student, and he had a commitment. The student athlete had 3 concussions in his senior year of high school and could never play that sport again. So what ended up happening was he did not attend the NESCAC, and he graduated from the University of Virginia. So that plan unfolded in such a way that everything was to be in alignment should something happen. Because remember, the broken leg test isn't just going into college, it is why you're in college. Does
Right.
the coach leave? Do you stay? Is it the
Mhm.
right place to be? Perfect. Do you like your teammates? This is why knowing your teammates before you make that decision is really important because the coach can be phenomenal. I can tell you all the tea in China, but if the tea's not good, it doesn't really matter, right?
Mm-hmm. So how do the students find that out? What steps or stages do you recommend for them to, since they have that initial contact just with the coach, and as you said, if the coach leaves, and I've had athletes who've had that happen too, and then all of a sudden they're feeling left high and dry. So
Right.
so what are your recommendations in terms of building that knowledge and understanding of what truly the team and the environment, or that this would be a place that the student could thrive?
Right. I think I like to reverse engineer it a little bit
Mhm.
because if we go back to like the college application, the heavy research that we talk about is really in answering the supplemental essay questions. And the supplemental essay questions are like, um, and you want to really be able to reflect on the university that you're writing about and how that aligns with you in maybe your areas of interest, social qualities, all those things. That applies very much the same way when it comes to athletics. So, for example, in the recruiting process, you want to look at the roster. You want to look at, do you know anyone who knows anyone playing there? Can you get on campus and speak with the student athletes away from the coach? If you're talking to the captain All American, of course they're happy. They're captain, they're All American, and they're probably had a really good career. Talk to those people who don't play because not everyone plays. You know, what is the development there? And find out what the real life is like. I know a lot of student athletes say, well, I'm not going to go there if I can't play right away. You
Right.
have no control over that. And a coach would be silly to guarantee you playing time right away because you have to earn your way in. That's one thing that is consistently a misnomer, right? Is that, oh yeah, I'm good enough. I've been recruited. I can play here. You've been recruited to be developed to see if you can be a part of my team. And we're taking a risk on you as you are taking a risk with us. So before a student athlete takes that risk, really have a conversation with the head coach and the assistant coach and ask hard questions. I have like a 3-page sheet of questions that some are from the NCAA list and all of that, but it's kind of algorithmic. You need to have these answers before you make a decision academically and athletically. And you have to be able to ask the coaches hard questions, not your parents, because if you're not playing, your parents are not talking to the coach. So, for example, coach, when do you make your decisions on your recruiting class? Where do you see me in the recruiting class? When will I know? What are the expectations from me around application? And that's only after you found out what are your requirements and responsibilities for your players. Asking the questions about discipline. What happens if?
Mhm.
Ask your questions about what if I'm missing classes? What academic support do I have because we're traveling? Like playing on a sport, playing on a team it is an environment and it is a responsibility and it is another kind of world. It is in and of itself a world of responsibility. So you want to know what you're getting into because it's not easy, but the student athlete needs to learn how to advocate for themselves because they are going to have to talk to a professor and say, sorry, I'm leaving tomorrow at 10. Can I turn my homework in while I'm on the bus? So that's that lifestyle. And that being a student athlete is just a very different lifestyle. I wouldn't trade my experience for the world, but I also can look in the eyes of some people to say that you better understand what you're getting into,
Mhm.
and be able to ask the tough questions because some of the hardest conversations are between the student athlete and the parent when a student athlete says, I don't want to do this anymore.
Mhm.
And that's after a student or it's after a family has spent tens of thousands of dollars traveling and all of that. That is the hardest conversation for a adolescent to have with a parent. They are not adults to have an adult conversation. So we have to allow that to happen. I would say of the student athletes or the student athletes that start with me in athletic recruiting,
Mhm.
probably 50% decide that they look at the college experience and say, I can do all of this. You know what? I just want to play club because this looks exciting and I can do all these things. So, it is a narrow funnel when you're looking at athletics. So look at the whole picture so that if something were to happen, you know what other areas of the map you can go to.
And I think that's really wise counsel because we do, as you mentioned, these are adolescents and their decision-making process shifts as they get older and what they think they want
Right,
to do as a freshman and what they want to do as a senior or a freshman in college may shift. So you
right.
mentioned club sports, and I think
Hmm.
that's an alternative. A lot of times people don't quite understand or realize is an option. So talk a little bit about what club versus varsity, what does
Right.
that look like?
So you have the varsity level. Varsity technically is the NCAA level or NAIA level, whatever level collegiately you're looking at. The university club level is a university sponsored team that goes on to play other universities. They travel, they play in a collegiate club level. So for example, there are collegiate clubs for almost every sport and even more than that, including Quidditch and those other things. But also like sports that are very, I call them niche because they're not as larger. Like I call ice hockey a niche for a lot of different reasons because there are so many different levels. But there is a collegiate, there's an NCAA level, but there's also other highly competitive club collegiate levels there, right? So there are those nuances to look at that, and they have a lot of them have all the benefits, and some of them have a little less rigorous requirements, but some are fairly rigorous that they would satisfy a high level competitive athlete that wants to still have a little bit of a life in college.
Yeah. And there's no like NCAA organization or something that clubs that you can go to and see all the different club sports in one place. Is that you have
Well,
to?
for the NCAA, yes, you could. The NCAA site has that, but for the other clubs, they're nuanced because often they're sport federations or they're coach clubs. So you would just do a deep dive. A good Boolean search would do if you're looking at high level collegiate ice hockey programs for men. Oftentimes they'll show you that they have national championships. What are their regions? Who are their contacts? So a little research goes a long way. And while they don't necessarily have the ability to help with admission like athletics, high level athletics, it is also one of those things where if admission reads that there's an additional opportunity for you to contribute to the community at that campus, you never know if that's going to be a positive enhancer to the application. It's nice to know that students can find off other ways to be a contributor to a community on campus.
Right, right. Yes. And that is nice. It's nice to have them be able to find, as you said, that balance. I can do this and this in college. I can still play the sport I love, which is a lot of
Hmm.
times that motivation for students. And yet I can do it at that club level versus the varsity level. So,
Right.
so how do students get the way students are noticed by coaches has changed significantly over the last few
Right.
years. You see all these movies and things like, oh, they saw you on the football field, at your homecoming game. That
Right.
is not the case anymore, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that really has, I don't know if that has shifted, but there are just so many events. And so, one reason why I kind of left um, college athletics because the recruiting was just so intensive. And unless you have a full staff, you cannot possibly see all the student athletes out there. This is why I talk about student athletes being proactive and contacting the coaches themselves. Because if I were to have gotten something from a recruiting service that was just on, their templated things, if that student athlete had not written to me, then I have no idea whether they know whether they have the qualifications to attend my university or if my university had the major they want, right? So it went left hand, right hand, trash can. If they were one of my student athletes, then I would want to know if or prospective student athletes, I would want to know if they have reached out to me. But the landscape has changed such that coaches want to see people physically, and most of them will host showcase or host ID camps, prospect days, Some of the showcases are pretty relevant. But they're, we're looking at money. You're spending lots of money to do these things. And so I advise my student athletes, it depends where you are in the process. If you're at the very front end and you're not even sure this is what you want to do, you want to try to determine, are you going to be able to compete in some kind of event like that? Because I've had a student say, yeah, I'm going to go to a showcase, but I'm not going to let any coaches know I'm there. I want to find out what this is about. And that student athlete walked away and she said, I don't want any part of this. I can't compete with them. I don't want any part of having to do all of this. And that was illuminating. So she risked nothing. The other part of this is that, and which I love about recruiting, is it's easier to step out and say no to recruiting than it is to get in the game late. It doesn't mean that you have to get in the recruiting game as an eighth grader. That's just developmentally just off the range. But college coaches are finding ways to get students on campus, on events. They want to physically get eyes on them. They want to have conversations with them, but they want to know how student athletes react to a mistake, react to coaching, react to their opponents, and what's happening in the stands. I will give you an example. When I was watching a student athlete at a game, I was sitting in the stands, not wearing any university attire there, and I knew the parents. The parents didn't recognize me. The parents were so out of control during the game, shouting at the coaches and the officials, that I actually stopped recruiting that student and said, thank you very much, but good luck on your journey. So that recruiting piece really is a family decision because that family comes with you. But I've got international students, and it is really difficult for my international students to come to US and play. Some of it is because they don't know the rigors, but the other part of it is that there might be some opinions of American coaches on international student athletes, depending on the sport, and that's very difficult. So time and money is spent getting in front of coaches, having a good relationship with them, and putting your best foot forward without any guarantee that you're going to land anywhere. So you're taking a risk. Student athletes fail every single day. And the worst thing is, and the best thing about recruiting is, you know where you're going before everybody else knows. You know where you're not, you know exactly where you're not going to go before everybody else knows. And that's hard because nobody likes to hear no because they take it personally, even though a no from a coach is not personal. That's super hard for that adolescent going into pre-adulthood. So yeah, coaches are looking at so many different things. You could have three coaches in the same sport in the same conference look at different things. My example is rowing. Everyone thinks it's erg, erg, erg. Well, yeah, it is, but there are many coaches that will take their erg class, but they also look at seat, how are you as a seat rower? How can you compete? And if you have a lot of mileage on you as a rower, you're heading into injury possibly. And so there's that variability that a lot of coaches will look at. And by the way, they want good citizens, good students, and they want you to graduate. That's important.
That's key. That's key. So from a counselor, this is my last question, is just from a counselor or advisor perspective, what can we do to support students and especially students in this process? What's something that you have found to be very effective or beneficial for students?
Yeah, I think supporting the student athlete in that you are taking a risk by doing this. Student athletes are extremely vulnerable. This is what I dislike a little bit about the social media part, because you can do that, but support them and then share with them the skill of a dispassionate response or a clarity or understanding. So for example, if a coach said something like, I would love to have you, but I don't have room at your position. That's a statement of fact. It is not personal, but it feels very, very personal to student athletes. So helping them discern the difference between nobody loves me as compared to understand that the coach has a decision to make. It is for the benefit of what their team is. And if the coach doesn't do their job well, they lose their job. And this is their job, this is their profession, and this is for now their career. You are someone who can be value added And if you're not needed, good luck, your value added possibly somewhere else. So understanding that honesty can hurt, but also understanding that they have to be honest with themselves and with you, the counselor, because I will say, and I'll say it with anybody who's looking here who's a parent, it is often hard to be honest with a parent. It's hard. So sometimes you have to give them the room, as long as the conversation is legal in terms of safe, give them the room to share with you and vet with you back and forth about how things are going. But really making this distinction between what are the facts. If I'm debriefing with a student, tell me the conversation. Well, I think I got an offer. No, tell me the exact conversation so I can play that back to you to tell you what I think I just heard. And if you don't know the answers I'm asking you, then I'm going to ask you to ask the coach directly exactly these things. So there's rose-colored lenses, but there's also the Mickey Mouse hearing where you can love the Magic Kingdom, but it may not be the fact.
Yeah, yeah, very good. Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you for your time. And
My
this is
pleasure.
such a hot topic, and it's something that, as counselors, advisors, we deal with all the time. And so it's always such a pleasure to talk with you and
I know I
get,
miss you. We have to see each other a little bit more.
I know, totally, totally. Thank you.
All right, Cyndy, thank you.